We just had the Treasurer on. Shift in numbers, shift in tone when it comes to the unemployment rate. We're now looking at something in the 4s when it was originally in the 5s. So, I mean, that's surely something that's going to be embraced, that the opportunity to do that anyway. Whether it happens or not is another matter.
Embraced is certainly a good word to use, because what was pre-pandemic was what was discussed in the unemployment rate was what they call NARU. So basically the rate to get to break even, where there's enough employment to start pushing up wages. Just to highlight what that number was, that was 4.5%. And we were a long way off it before the pandemic. So your question, I heard you talk to the Treasurer about it, is how do you get there? We weren't getting there before the pandemic. How are we going to get there in the current market with where we're at? And that is the number one question I think they need to ask. So that therefore means it has to be targeted stimulus. It has to be support for things like childcare, allowing particularly two-parent or co-parent establishments to be working both at the same time. It would also probably have to look at finding ways to really hit industries that have been quite sluggish. So it's not just looking at the ones that are easy to talk about, things like hospitality, tourism, etc. You could probably highlight things also like education, considering that at the moment education's under real pressure with COVID. You'd also be looking at industries around infrastructure, which is always a quick boost. And I use that deliberately. Infrastructure is like the barometer of how things are going. When things are good, it's booming. When things stop, it goes backwards very, very quickly, and it has very cyclical staff. So they're the areas that you could target to get to 4%. The other difference is net migration. And I think that needs to also be highlighted quite heavily about why wages particularly have been poor. So the Treasurer has a slight advantage at the moment, is that we don't have net migration. The borders are shut and look like being so for at least the rest of 2021, most of 2022, if you're really honest about what's been said out of Canberra. So he could get there because of that, because we don't have the same amount of migration that we have had in the past. Taxation, therefore, is better. There's no doubt about that, and he alluded to that. It's basically a reversal, so you don't have to have support, you have better tax income. The way to look at it is there is a necessity to start seeing some form of inflation. And inflation yesterday was pretty anemic, which is what we knew, but it was worse than expected, I think you need to highlight.
Was that a bit of a hangover, Evan?
Yeah, partly. But I think if you look at it, it also showed that the systematic problems that we've had pre-COVID were actually still there. So we didn't actually see... We are seeing a rate of growth that we haven't seen in inflation for a long, long time, because we're coming off a negative base and it's really moving. But it's the pre-COVID problems that are still holding it up. So there is no wage growth. In fact, it's pretty anemic. You have seen really no movement in sort of pricing that you'd want to be seeing it, despite what's going on in housing. And that's things that need to start moving, which is good. If you look at furniture, that was poor, it went backwards. If you look at things like software, that was also backwards. So core parts of the inflation data were nominal, and that therefore is all feeds into this budget problem that Frydenberg has, which is how does he get employment to 4%, as you've already alluded to, but how does he actually start driving pricing to actually start making the economy grow at a much more structurally sustainable level than sort of a cyclical part we're going through right now.
Okay.